When ancient humans drank alcohol, they were not only getting drunk. Very often, they were doing the work that helped build culture itself. They feasted, mourned, prayed, bargained, told stories, paid workers, honored the dead, and turned simple crops into powerful shared meaning. So if the title makes you picture prehistoric people stumbling around a fire, the real story is much wider and much more interesting. Alcohol in the ancient world was not just fun. It could be ritual, food, medicine, payment, diplomacy, and social glue at the same time. To understand what happened after drinking, we should start even before brewing, because humans may have known ethanol long before making it on purpose. Some researchers argue that an ancient change in the alcohol processing enzyme called ADH4 helped our distant ape ancestors handle fermenting fruit better. That change may go back around 10 million years, which suggests that naturally fermented food was not a brand new experience for our lineage. This idea is often called the drunken monkey hypothesis, though many details are still debated and should be treated carefully. Even if that early story remains partly uncertain, archaeology gives us much firmer evidence once humans began making alcohol intentionally. One of the oldest famous sites is Raqefet Cave in present-day Israel, linked to the Natufian culture around 13,000 years ago. Residues in stone mortars there suggest beer-like fermentation, and researchers connect that activity to feasting and possibly funerary ritual. That detail matters because one of the earliest known brewing cases may have been tied not to casual partying, but to death and ceremony. Another major discovery comes from Jiahu in Neolithic China, where pottery held signs of a mixed fermented drink made from rice, honey, and fruit. That drink dates to roughly 7,000 to 6,600 BCE and is often called the earliest chemically confirmed alcoholic beverage found so far. It was not just beer in a modern sense, and it was not exactly wine either. It was a mixed fermentation, which shows that ancient people were experimenting with recipes very early and in surprisingly creative ways. Wine has its own very old trail through history. Archaeological evidence from Georgia pushes grape wine production back to around 6000 BCE, and northwestern Iran shows very early wine storage too. At Irini in Armenia, around 4100 BCE, archaeologists found what is often described as the oldest known winery. The site included equipment linked to pressing grapes and fermenting them, which shows organized production, not random accidental spoilage. By the Bronze Age, alcohol was no strange side product. It was woven into farming, storage, ritual, and social order. So what did ancient humans actually do after drinking these early beers, wines, and mixed fermented drinks? They feasted together, and feasting is one of the clearest answers in archaeology. A feast is not just a big meal. It is a social machine that redistributes food, creates debts, raises hosts, and marks an event as special. Alcohol intensified those moments because it lowered inhibition, lifted emotion, and made the gathering feel different from an ordinary day. That is why drinking often appeared at seasonal festivals, elite banquets, funerals, harvest events, and victory celebrations. The drink helped turn a crowd into a group and a meal into a memory. Ancient people also used alcohol in rituals. Drinking could accompany offerings to gods, ancestor rites, temple ceremonies, burials, and sacred meals shared by a community. In that setting, alcohol was not only a substance in a cup, it was part of a bridge between daily life and the sacred. This is one reason the evidence from burial contexts is so striking. At places like Raqefet Cave, drinking may have helped the living manage grief while symbolically helping the dead move into another realm. So after drinking, ancient humans sometimes sang, remembered, cried, and buried their dead with shared emotion around them. Alcohol also built social bonds, and this may be one of its oldest and strongest jobs. A shared drink can turn strangers into partners, families into tighter groups, and allies into people bound by a common event. In small communities and early states, that bonding effect was politically useful as well as emotionally powerful. A ruler or host who controlled surplus grain or grapes could sponsor a feast and gain status through generosity. That means ancient drinking was often about hierarchy as much as happiness. Who served the drink, who received the best cup, and who hosted the event could all signal power. Feasts say, I have enough food to share, enough labor to produce this, and enough importance to gather people around me. That message mattered in ancient societies where food storage and agricultural surplus were forms of visible strength. Alcohol also entered work and wages, especially in places like Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. In Mesopotamia, beer appears in administrative records, religious practice, and literature, which tells us it was built into daily systems. The famous hymn to Ninkasi praises a beer goddess, and also preserves material that looks a lot like brewing instructions. That is a wonderful clue because it shows brewing was important enough to live inside both economy and religion. Beer rations show up in records too, meaning drink could function as food and payment at the same time. In ancient Egypt, beer and bread were core parts of diet, and workers could receive beer as part of their support. That does not mean giant monuments were built by people staggering around drunk all day. It means beer formed part of a calorie system that helped feed large organized labor forces. Ancient beer was often thicker, cloudier, and more nutritious than many modern viewers imagine. Some early beers likely carried suspended grain, yeast, and plant residue, which made them closer to liquid food than to modern hard liquor. That matters because drinking was not always mainly about heavy intoxication. Sometimes it was about calories, hydration, flavor, and making staple crops more usable and stable. The old claim that everyone in the past drank alcohol only because water was unsafe is too simple. People also used springs, wells, cisterns, and other water sources, so ancient life was not one giant desperate search for fermented liquid. Still, fermentation could make beverages more stable, more nutritious, and more pleasant in growing settlements. Weak beer or wine mixed with water could fit into daily life without acting like a modern bottle of strong spirits. This is another key fact. Distillation came much later than the ancient periods we are mainly talking about here. For most of prehistory and antiquity, people drank fermented beverages, not high-proof distilled liquor. That changed both the social setting and the physical effect of drinking. Ancient alcohol culture often grew around meals, rituals, and gatherings, rather than around the fast intoxication later spirits made easier. The Greek world adds another layer to this story. In the symposium, elite men drank wine in a structured social setting that mixed conversation, poetry, games, and status display. Greek wine was often diluted with water, and drinking it undiluted was widely linked with excess or barbarism in elite ideas. That detail shows ancient people did not simply celebrate drinking without rules. They often built rituals, ratios, and expectations around it to keep the event meaningful and ordered. Rome later adapted many of these traditions, blending banqueting, religion, luxury, and social performance. The Americas tell us something equally important. Fermentation was not a single invention spreading from one place. Long before European contact, societies in the Andes and Mesoamerica made fermented maize drinks like chicha and agave drinks like pulque. These drinks also played roles in ritual, labor, agriculture, and identity. So when we ask what ancient humans did after drinking, the answer reaches across many world regions, not only Europe and the Near East. Alcohol also had medicinal and practical uses. Ancient medical traditions sometimes used wine or beer as carriers for herbs and as part of therapeutic mixtures. Its preservative power and everyday acceptance made it useful for certain kinds of preparation and treatment. But ancient people were not fools who thought alcohol was always harmless. Many cultures also warned about drunkenness, disorder, shame, and danger. Law codes, moral texts, and religious writings show that drinking was respected in some settings and feared in others. That double edge is important because it means ancient alcohol was never only joy. It could unite a group, but it could also expose chaos inside the group. Archaeology helps us see all this through evidence instead of fantasy. Researchers use residue chemistry, vessel shapes, starch damage, presses, vats, and serving tools to identify ancient drinking practices. Tartaric acid can point toward grape wine, while other traces can support brewing or vessel treatment. Context matters just as much as chemistry, because a drinking vessel in a grave means something different from one in a kitchen. So what happened psychologically after ancient humans drank? We cannot interview them, but modern social science gives us strong clues about mood, inhibition, bonding, and group emotion. Alcohol can lower inhibition, shift mood, deepen group feeling, and intensify ritual experience. In an early village or state, those effects could strengthen mourning, alliance-making, storytelling, and shared belief in a very direct way. That is why one of the best answers to the title is this. After drinking, ancient humans often became more collective. They sang together, remembered together, negotiated together, and sometimes transformed an ordinary gathering into a sacred one. In funerary settings, alcohol may have helped the living carry grief and helped the dead enter memory with ceremony around them. In labor systems, alcohol helped turn crops into calories and rations that supported work. In elite halls, it helped turn wealth into status and status into obedience. In villages and households, it helped turn food surplus into bonding, celebration, and story. That is why some archaeologists have even suggested that the desire for beer may have helped push agriculture forward. The claim is debated, and it would be too strong to say beer alone caused farming. But early evidence does suggest that fermented grain drinks were important enough to encourage cultivation, storage, and processing. In other words, bread and beer may have grown side by side. The deepest point is that alcohol was not an accidental extra added after civilization was already finished. In many places, alcohol was one of the tools through which civilization learned to feel like a group. So what did ancient humans do after drinking? They did many of the same things people do now, but in settings where drink also carried ritual weight, economic use, and social power. They feasted, prayed, mourned, paid labor, built alliances, displayed rank, and gave the dead a place inside memory. That makes ancient drinking history much bigger than a story about getting tipsy. It becomes a story about how humans used fermentation to turn crops, grief, power, and belief into shared experience. If you want another ancient story that sounds simple at first but hides a much deeper human pattern, watch the next history video. Think about a funeral without shared food, shared drink, or shared ritual, and then think about how much colder and lonelier that event would feel. Alcohol could help turn private grief into a public act, which is one reason burial sites matter so much in this history. The same drink that softened sorrow could also mark respect, memory, and the bond between the living and the dead. At a feast, alcohol could work in the opposite emotional direction and raise joy, laughter, courage, and group identity. That emotional flexibility made fermented drink useful in almost every major human transition, from harvest to mourning to celebration. It could help people cross a line together, and that is often what ritual is really about. Ancient hosts also understood something modern hosts still know. Serving drink can create obligation. If I feed you, pour for you, and gather people under my roof, I do more than show kindness, I show power. That is why feasting and hierarchy appear together so often in archaeology, especially where surplus grain or wine could be controlled. Control the drink, and you can shape the mood, the memory, and the social map of the gathering. Even the tools of drinking tell stories, because special cups, jars, filters, and serving vessels mark events as important and structured. A plain household pot says one thing, while a ceremonial vessel in a grave or palace says something much larger. So ancient alcohol is never just about the liquid itself. It is also about containers, setting, audience, and purpose. Once all those pieces come together, the title has a very human answer. After drinking, ancient humans often did not escape culture. They stepped deeper into it. And that is why the history of alcohol is really a history of humans learning how to feel, remember, and belong together. That is also why the strongest picture of ancient drinking is not one person alone with a cup in the dark. It is a circle of people using a drink to mark labor, loss, celebration, rank, worship, and the simple need to belong. Fermentation gave ancient communities more than a buzz. It gave them a tool for turning biology into social meaning. And once humans discovered that power, alcohol became part of the story of civilization itself. And so after drinking, ancient humans often did what humans still do best. They turned a shared substance into a shared story about who they were together, and that shared story is the real reason ancient alcohol matters so much.